Daniel chapter 1 is where we'll be today, and let's start with just reading it, and then we'll talk about some of the question marks that probably pop up in your mind as you read this, and hopefully we'll give some answers to those question marks, turn them into periods or exclamation points, I suppose. Verse number 1. In the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, of the king's seed and of the princes, children in whom there was no blemish, but well-favored and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge and understanding, science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now, among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and unto Hananiah of Shadrach, and unto Mishael of Meshach, and unto Azariah of Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Thereof he requested of the prince. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink, for why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. And then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them to this matter, and proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat, and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. And for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king communed with them, and among them was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the 1st year of King Cyrus. Well, this is Daniel chapter 1, and it's going to be a miracle of God today if we get through the whole chapter, but we'll see. I imagine that you probably are instinctively having this one question that pops up in your mind as you read this, and the one question is, why wouldn't he eat the meat? What was it about the meat and the wine that would defile him? You know, the Old Testament law didn't say don't ever eat meat. The Old Testament law didn't say eat only vegetables. That's what the word pulse means. But here's Daniel, and he's brought into the king's care, and he's going to be a servant in the king's house. And the king says, I want you to eat this so that you're well fed. And he says, I'm not going to eat it. It would defile me. And why in the world would it defile him? It's not a law in the Old Testament that you not eat meat, or that you not drink wine, or that you only eat vegetables and water. I mean, I mean, that would be a crazy law, right? So why is it that this is so important to Daniel? And I think we'll find the answer as we examine this. So let's go back to verse 1. And I think that as we understand what's taking place here, these Jewish boys that are in Babylon, that are now find themselves in a foreign country, in a foreign land, that wants to incorporate them into their culture of worship of false gods, I think we will find that there's a very clear application that we can draw for ourselves from this story. However, let's hold the application until we really first have gotten the interpretation. Let's first try to understand what's being said here, and then we can try to apply it to our own lives and the principles that we find here. Let's look at verse 1. It says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah." Pause. There are several things that need to be explained in that statement. Jehoiakim is one of the last kings of Israel. Israel, of course, we know they're the chosen people of God. God promised Abraham that he was going to have descendants that would be a great nation. Then, Abraham's descendants ended up enslaved in Egypt. He brought them out of Egypt. He gave them the land of Canaan, so on and so forth, right? Eventually, they end up establishing a monarchy with a king. The kingdom divides into the northern and the southern kingdoms. But all the while, God has been telling them, listen, if you will serve me, I will bless you. If you serve false gods, I will curse you. They go against God. They turn to false gods. The chief sinners was the northern half, or the northern 10 tribes. It wasn't really half, but the northern tribes of Israel. And they were taken captive about more than 100 years before this instance. They were taken captive by an empire called the Assyrian Empire. They came and conquered the northern 10 tribes of Israel. But now the southern 10 tribes of Israel are left for the next 100 years plus. And they are, more wishy-washy. They'll have one king that leads them to follow God, and the next king that leads them to worship idols. And the next king leads them to follow God, but the people still want to follow idols. And so when the next king comes, they're like, no, we want to follow idols. And you've got this back and forth going on in the southern kingdom. And God promises that the southern kingdom will be destroyed for their idolatry as well. And the way that it works out is their last good king was a guy named Josiah. Josiah was a good king and sort of led a bit of a revival, at least in the leadership of Israel, back to doing what is right. But the people of Israel, you can read about this in the prophets, the people of Israel during the time of Josiah are still very much given to idolatry, very cold to God himself. And when Josiah dies, he's killed by Pharaoh, and you have this interesting thing going on in Israel. What happens is Pharaoh is, of course, the king of the Egyptian empire, and the king of the Babylonian empire, which has conquered the Assyrian empire, is Nebuchadnezzar. Now, the way to get from Egypt to Babylon is through Israel, and the way to get from Babylon to Egypt, of course, is through Israel. Israel is the battleground. It's the place between the two warring empires. So Pharaoh is on his way up to do battle with Nebuchadnezzar, with the Babylonians, and Josiah says, "You can't pass through here," and goes out to stop him, and Pharaoh kills Josiah. Then the people of Israel set up another king after Josiah, but Pharaoh, after he's done the battle, comes back through and says, no, I'll put my own king up. And he puts up Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim is the king. He's a descendant of Josiah, but he's not the original king that was chosen to follow Josiah. He's the one Pharaoh put up just so that they didn't have the one they wanted. That was the whole point with Pharaoh. Well, now comes Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar wants to attack the Egyptians, and he's got to go through Israel. So he besieges Israel because they're not going to let him just pass through with his army. So he besieges Jerusalem with Jehoiakim in it, and he conquers them. And what he's going to do is he's going to take a different strategy because Israel is such a vital. Occupies such a vital place in this whole struggle between Egypt and Babylon. He wants Israel on his side. He really does, and he wants them to want to be Babylonians. So what he decides to do is he takes the best of the best, the people the children of the palace, the ones who would be the next leaders, the ones that the people in Israel thought the best of, that they were just highly esteemed by everyone in the palace. They were the ones that, they would be the up-and-comers, right? They're a shoo-in to win the next election if there were an election, okay? They didn't have elections, but if there were, you can guarantee Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they would be the top candidates, right? These were the ones that everyone thought the best of. And he's going to take them back to Babylon and make them love Babylon. And then send them back eventually to Israel, to lead Israel to love Babylon and to just be part of Babylon. So that way he's got a good border land that loves Babylon between him and Egypt. That was the idea. That seems to be his goal. And so now with that preface, knowing what it means by saying Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Judah being the southern tribes, the northern tribes have already gone. Judah is the word meaning both the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin that were the southern kingdom. It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God. Now, there's another statement that needs some explanation. The vessels of the house of God, these were the things that were in the temple that were used to worship God. Gold and silver and precious things. Now, we don't know exactly which things Nebuchadnezzar took, but he did not take all of them. Well, you have to scratch your head there and ask yourself, well, why didn't Nebuchadnezzar take all of them? Because Nebuchadnezzar wasn't here to try to make Israel angry at him. He was trying to make Israel Babylon. And so, clearly, Nebuchadnezzar's gods were greater than Israel's God because Nebuchadnezzar won the battle. Right? This is how they thought back then. As a matter of fact, we have many quotations through the book of Kings where a king will say, "Yaha, my God is greater than your God. I'll prove it by winning this battle." This happens all the time in this time. And so Nebuchadnezzar thinks, well, my gods are obviously greater than your Yahweh because I beat you. So I'm going to give you guys the honor of still allowing you to worship your God, and I'm going to even take some of your, well, you don't have idols, so I'll just take some of the things from your temple, and I'll put them in the temple to our God. And so we'll worship your God too. He'll be part of all of our gods, our pantheon, and you guys are going to be part of Babylon. And you guys keep on worshiping your specific God of this area, and he'll also be honored with all the greater gods that just beat him. Like, you guys are the defeated people, your God is a defeated God, and I'm going to be very kind to you and take some of the pieces from your temple and put them in our temple. Isn't that very kind? Or at least it is from Nebuchadnezzar's perspective. The Israelites aren't quite so thrilled about it, right? I mean, they don't feel so good, but he thinks this is going to help them, right? So let's continue on. He takes part of the vessels of the house of God, and he carried to the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And it says, and the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed. So of the king's seed, the princes, the ones who would be the candidates for the next king. It says, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge. It says they were well favored. That means that the people, he doesn't know he doesn't know who's the best guys. He's going to find out who the other people in Israel think are the best of the best in the king's house, of the king's children, of the princes, of the important people. And those children, not the older ones, I don't care about them because I need time to turn them into Babylonians and then send them back to rule, right? And so I want the ones that the people all are going to follow, right? Well-favored, skillful in wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding science. Now, also he thinks that the smartest of the people of Israel are not going to have a problem with this. This is a wonderful thing. If you're smart, you know that your God has been defeated and you should follow our gods, right? Our gods are clearly better. The smart people will know this, right? And the smart ones will realize that I'm being very, very generous here and I could just kill y'all, right? But the smart ones will become Babylonians because Babylonians are smart, Nebuchadnezzar thinks that. He's a Babylonian, right? Okay, so this is the mindset. Let's read on. It says, "In understanding science as such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace," meaning they're going to be servants directly to the king of not just this little tiny puny land, right? Just Judah and Benjamin, right? The southern tribes of Israel. They're going to be standing in the emperor's palace, the emperor of Babylon, the great Babylon. So they're going to have a very important place. And whom they might teach the learning and tongue of the Chaldeans. So they need to learn the language of the Babylonians, the tongue of the Chaldeans, and all the things that we know and learn. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, and so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Notice that what the king is doing here is a benefit in his mind. I mean, he's being incredibly gracious and kind to these children. He's trying to butter them up, if you will. He's giving them the food that's apportioned to his palace. They're going to be eating the palace food. They're going to be drinking the palace wine. They're going to be learning the language of the Babylonians. They're going to be they have got it made, right? I mean, they've got it. They're being made to be very comfortable, or at least that is the intention. But look at what it says. "Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah." Now it says children of Judah, of the children of Judah. This probably means princes, not of the tribe of Benjamin, but princes of the tribe of Judah, which would have been, the princes of the tribe of Judah would have been in the line of David, right? Not necessarily sons of Josiah, but in the line of David like Josiah was. So they're in that line. So they could be kings in Israel if they, if Nebuchadnezzar had set them up as kings. So it says, "Unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names." For now the prince of the eunuchs is going to be he's the head guy of all the king's servants. He's the guy in charge of the king's servants. Now you have to understand, the guy who's the head of the house in Babylon, they didn't make the mistake that Potiphar made in Egypt. Remember what Potiphar did? He set up a guy who's head of his whole house, and he wasn't a eunuch. And his wife wanted to mess around with him, right? In Babylon, if you were head of the king's house, you had to be a eunuch. You couldn't possibly do anything, right? You couldn't possibly mess around with the king's wives, right? With the king's women. So that's why it's called the eunuch. But here's the head of the king's house, and he says, all right, well, we're going to give Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, Hananiah the name of Shadrach, and Mishael the name of Meshach, and Azariah the name of Abednego. Now, it's very, very much debated what these names all mean. The Jewish names are pretty easy to know what the meaning is. The Babylonian names, the language of Babylon, the Chaldean language, hasn't sort of survived quite as well as the Hebrew language has. So it's a little bit more dicey. But I'm going to give you what we think is the meanings of the Babylonian names. So Daniel's name meant, and the meaning of names was very important to them. Daniel's name meant in Hebrew, "God is my judge." Yahweh, God is my judge. Well, the prince of the eunuchs says, clearly, God failed you. I mean, we defeated you. So your God is beaten. So we're going to give you a new name out of our good graces. You wouldn't want to be walking around with that old embarrassing name that embarrasses you because it's that old God that got defeated. You're an important guy now. You can't have an embarrassing name. We'll give you a name. It's Belteshazzar. Now, the word Belteshazzar, best we can tell, means Bel will protect him. Now, Bel is sort of like the main god of the Chaldeans, of the Babylonians. Bel. He goes by a couple different names, but Bel would be the main name. And so Daniel, God is my judge, becomes, no. Yahweh obviously wasn't a good judge for you. We'll give you, Bel will protect him. Our God will protect him. Okay? Hananiah, God, means God has been gracious. Well, a lot of good your gracious God did for you. You guys got conquered. So we're going to give you a different name, Hananiah. You're going to be Shadrach. Now, we're not sure what this means, but it looks like it means that he was inspired of, and then a name of a god. Maybe it's Merdach, which was another name for Bel. Maybe it was Aku. People have, but it means inspired by our false god. Instead of being gracious, God has been gracious to him. Yahweh, God has been gracious. Mishael means who is like Yahweh. Like nobody's like Yahweh. Well, they're scratching their head. Your name's kind of embarrassing because Yahweh's been defeated by our armies. So instead, you're going to get the name Meshach, which means that you belong to, and it's the same god, either Aku or Murdak or whatever. You belong to our gods. Azariah means God has helped him. But they changed his name to Abednego, which means a servant of Nebo, which was another god. So you see how they say, well, God clearly didn't help him, right? Because we conquered them. So that's embarrassing for him to be walking around with the name Yahweh helps him when he's in bondage. So to help him with this embarrassment, I mean, this was considered a very kind thing for them to do. We're going to be gracious to you and let you change those embarrassing names and give you names for the good, true gods that we have now proven are the right ones. But, verse 8, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat nor of the wine which he drank. Now, Daniel couldn't do anything about what they called him. By the way, that's something our society could probably learn. You can't make people call you something, right? Just because you want them to call you something, you don't get to decide that, right? It's not how it works. Daniel couldn't do anything about the name they called him. They were going to call him Belteshazzar if they wanted to call him Belteshazzar, all right? But he wasn't going to act in ways that would defile himself. And he believed that eating the meat of the king and drinking the wine of the king would defile him. Now, some people have said, well, this is because, if he ate with that king's group, then, the conversation and the things that they did while they were eating, he didn't want to be a part of. That's not what he said, because he offers instead to eat something else. So it's clearly not that, the conversation, what's happening at the meal, it's what he's eating. And he specifically says that it's going to defile him, right? It would defile him to eat the meat or to drink the wine. Now, there are laws in the Old Testament about, Jews can't eat pork, for instance. All right, I get that. But he didn't say, I will not eat the meat when it's pork and I'll eat it when it's not. And also, there's no law in the Old Testament that says you can't drink wine. I mean, granted, in the Jewish society, their wine wasn't very intoxicating. It was usually wine, a little tiny bit of wine mixed with water to sort of purify the water. I mean, so it might have been different in Babylon, but there wasn't a law that said that they would be defiled by this. I mean, so where is he getting this? Well, there seems to be a very clear tie between this statement in chapter 1, verse 8, and Deuteronomy chapter 32. And while we're turning to Deuteronomy 32, I want to explain just a little bit about this time period. We know from lots of different accounts from other historical things and other places in the Bible that first kings and priests in Babylon were elevated to the level of gods. They actually used the same word for a king and for a priest as they did for their god. So if they had a god of the air, they would call him they speak about him with a prefix en of the air, Lord of the air. And God of the sun is Lord of the sun, and God of the sea is En of the sea, Lord of the sea. And then the king and the priest would also be called En of the nation. He's the Lord of the nation. So the gods and the king, the emperor, and the priests would be considered gods, little gods, sort of like God incarnates of the nation. So you have this problem, and then you have also the problem that when they brought a sacrifice to a false god in those days, it was assumed that the sacrifice was not going to be consumed by the god didn't need to eat. Instead, they would bring a sacrifice to a false god, and they would expect that the loyal, devoted followers of the false god would be the ones who benefited from the sacrifice. I mean, this is normal. Actually, even Israel did this, that besides the burnt offerings that were consumed, there were offerings that they brought, and the priests ate them in the temple. That was, it was assumed that that's how they stayed alive, was by the sacrifices that were brought to God, because God didn't need to eat anything right? These were parts of how they supported their priests. And this, of course, took place in Babylon, but since the king and the priests were considered little gods, you would bring sacrifices to the king, or bring sacrifices to the god, and it would be what was eaten in the king's house. And not only that, but when you ate it then, if you were part of the king's house and you ate these sacrifices, you were considered to be one of the loyal, devoted followers of that God. Kind of like today. I mean, you can see a little bit of this if we use the example of even in this church, right? When we come together, we put money in an offering plate and we're giving that money to God. But we understand that the money is going to be used to support the church. You know, people like me who are the, devoted followers who are, sort of preaching and teaching and live off of the sacrifices of others for the work of God. We understand that that's how it works. The pastor and if there's a larger church, you might have other people on staff who are depending on those things to survive. Well, that's what happened back then too. And if you were the one eating the sacrifice, you then would be one of the people who's like the top-notch follower of that God because you're receiving the food that was sacrificed to that God. Now look at what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 32. To give you the context of the rest of the chapter so we understand what's being said here. The people of Israel are being warned before Moses dies, what's going to happen to them if they will turn and worship false gods. That if they turn and worship false gods, God will reject them. And verse 36, "For the Lord shall judge his people and repent himself for his servants when he seeth that their power is gone and there is none shut up or left. And he shall say, Where are their gods, their rock in whom they trusted, which did eat the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offerings?" Notice, you got fat, meat, and wine, drink. You got meat and wine, the fat and wine of their drink offerings. Let them rise up and help you be your protection. So let me boil this down. This passage right here is God is saying, if you guys are going to go after these false gods, so much that you're even going to be like in the temple receiving the benefits of the sacrifices to them. Like you're going to be like the devoted followers to these false gods, practically eating the meat and drinking the wine that's sacrificed to these gods. He's saying this is the picture of someone who is a devoted follower who's propagating worship to the false god. Because of course, if you're living off of the sacrifices that come to the false god, you are a propagator. Because if the sacrifices stop coming, you stop having a livelihood, right? So like your whole life is bound up in this propagation of false gods. God is saying this is what's going to happen with Israel one day. And when it happens, when they become so supportive and so loyal to false gods, I'm going to reject them. And they're going to go off into slavery, and the land's going to be empty, and I'm going to say, what happened to your gods that you were so faithful to? Why didn't they help you? You see, Daniel's actually experiencing this in real life. His nation had gone away and worshipped false gods, and now God had rejected them, and they were sold into slavery. And now here he is, and he's like, I am not eating meat or drinking wine that is offered to false gods. That would be like I am a promoter of your God, and I'm not. I can't do that. I cannot act in such a way as to pretend that our God failed. He didn't fail. We turned our backs on him. That's why you conquered us. We've beaten off bigger armies than yours, Nebuchadnezzar, when we were following God, but we turned away from him. He's not beaten, and yet the people around him don't understand this. Understand that the Babylonians are thinking that they're being very kind and that they have proven that they are correct. They have proven that your God is dead or never existed in the first place, that he's weak. And now we're accepting your surrender, Daniel. And Daniel says, you can call me what you want to call me. You can put me in the king's palace if you want to put me in the king's palace. You could teach me the language if you want to teach me the language. But I will not act as if with this some sort of pretense like my God is not real or is not dead. I will not pretend that your God is real and the one true God is not. Now, what's interesting is that throughout the first half of the book of Daniel, this is the theme. God actually wants to use Daniel to announce to all of Babylon that he is the real God. And in fact, by the end of the first few chapters, the very king Nebuchadnezzar is going to become a believer in the one true God of Israel. I mean, God is setting up some amazing things. He's setting up some foundational things here. But in Daniel chapter 1, it has to start with Daniel saying, I'm not giving in. Understand that what Daniel's asking is offensive to the people around him. It's going to offend them. They think they're being very kind to him. And he's going to offend them by saying, no, I'm not going to accept that premise. I'm not going to just worship my God in my head and not tell anyone because, no one else believes it. I'm not going to do that. I cannot defile myself by this pretense that I'm some sort of follower of these false gods this food has been offered to. And I specifically have been told not to eat fat or wine offered to false gods. So, vegetables and water. How about vegetables and water? Those were his only options. So he says, listen, so look what verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart not that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the princes of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. He says, listen, you're put this food in front of me, but I'm not going to eat it. So please don't make me eat it. I'm not going to. And it says, now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. Now, this is something God did. He had put sort of a good taste in the mouth of the eunuch in relation to Daniel. He thought well of Daniel. So he's not like, all right, kill you right here, right on the spot. Right? Instead, he's like, okay, I understand what you're saying, Daniel, but you have to understand where I'm coming from. And look at what he says. Verse 10, the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king. You understand that Nebuchadnezzar is being kind to you. You are a conquered people, and he's giving you meat to make you healthy and happy so that you become Babylonians. And you're saying, I'm not going to eat the meat. I'm not going to drink the wine. What you're saying is you don't want to be a Babylonian. And that's my whole job, man. You gotta do this. And if you end up looking all sickly at the end of the 3 years, it's my head on the chopping block. My one job is to make sure you guys are healthy, happy, and comfortable. And you guys fall in love with Babylon. If he finds out that you're all looking all scrawny because you're running around here eating a bunch of vegetables, I can't do that. So it says, the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? So all the other kids from Israel are eating it. That tells you a little bit about the other kids, doesn't it? I mean, they didn't have a problem with it. They're probably doing it back at home, right? They were probably, participating in idolatry back at home. Probably wasn't a big deal. I don't know if Daniel, maybe Daniel used to do that. We don't know. But he's at least putting two and two together and saying, boy, this is the reason that we're captive right now. This is the reason that Babylon beat us, is because we were going after false gods. I ain't going to do it anymore. And Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah say, all right, we're with you, Daniel. So it says, the answer from the prince of the eunuchs is, no, I'm not going to do that. You could get me killed. No, you're going to eat the meat. You're going to eat the meat and you're going to like it. Kind of like me with my kids when they were younger, Now it's like, no, that's enough. You've had enough. Stop eating, But there was a time it was like, you're going to eat this and you're going to like it. Anyway, that's side point. All right, verse 11. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set up over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So he sort of had a hierarchy, right? And he put someone else in charge of these rabble-rousers, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so Daniel goes to him and says, listen, I know what the king said, and I know what the prince of the eunuchs said, but I am not eating the meat, and I am not going to drink the wine. So here, let's do a compromise here. Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days. Just give me 10 days and prove us. Let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Pulse is just vegetables. That's what it means. It just is a word for vegetables. Give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he's like, listen, we're not going to eat the meat, the fat, and we're not going to eat the wine, drink the wine, but we'll drink water and whatever vegetables you got, and we'll do that. And we'll test it out. Give us 10 days, and after 10 days, if we look weak and scrawny and dying, which, by the way, if you only eat vegetables and water, you will. Okay? I've never seen a fat vegan. Okay? I've just never seen that before. That would be a new thing. I've been a vegan for the last 5 hours. Before that, I wasn't, and I won't be for the rest of the day either. But you go long enough, you go 10 days, you're gonna look different. He's like, all right, well, it's not gonna ruin everything for just 10 days, right? Give us 10 days and just see if we look more healthy or not. Now, this is going to require a miracle, but Daniel, there's one of two things that might be going on here. Either Daniel, we find out that Daniel is getting visions and dreams from God in a miraculous way. It may be that God told Daniel, hey, don't worry, I got your back, just don't do it, right? It may be that. It's also possible that Daniel's just saying, well, maybe he'll do it or maybe he won't. If not, I'll die, but at least I'll get 10 days where I'm not having to defile myself, and I'm not going to defile myself. I'm just not going to do it. Whatever Daniel's reasoning here, he's trusting God, and that's it. He's just saying, God told me not to do it. I know this offends you. I know it might get me killed and it might get me hated, but I'm going to do what God wants me to do, period. End of conversation. So it says, so he counseled them in this matter and proved them 10 days, verse 14. Verse 15, and at the end of 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. The king wants them to be living high on the hog, literally hog, probably, He wants them, sitting back and just having a time, He wants them loving Babylon. And it turns out that Daniel looks like he's been sitting back and eating really well and, after eating just vegetables and water for 10 days. Not even any ice cream. I mean, come on. No hamburgers, none of that. So there's a miracle that takes place. Verse 16, thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink and gave them pulse. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days, meaning the 3 years that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. Let me just sort of bring this to a conclusion. Understanding what God is going to do with Daniel throughout the rest of the book, he needs Daniel to stand out and to say, I'm not going to defile myself. He needs to trust God. There were more than just 4 boys brought from Israel. And the rest of them all thought, well, it would be offensive. It would be, they would be offended. I'm being treated so well. I'm just going to go along with the flow. Maybe they thought, maybe they're being nice to my God. They're putting him in the house of their gods. They're putting him as one of their gods, But Daniel understood that if he wasn't standing for the one true God of Israel, then there wasn't really a whole lot of purpose to his life at all. I mean, what's the point? These are people who need to know that their gods aren't real and that God is true. And the reason that they've conquered our nation is because we've turned away from God. And if I just make nice with them and do what they expect me to do, they're never going to learn the truth. And so I won't defile myself for the sake of the name of the God of Israel. And most certainly I won't find myself dependent on the sacrifices to false gods, as if people stopped sacrificing to Nebo, I'm going to die because I wouldn't have any food to eat anymore. I'm most certainly not going to make myself dependent on all of these false deities. I plan to go around telling people not to sacrifice to them. I plan to tell people this isn't right. These aren't the true gods. I'm not going to do that and also eat the food from the sacrifices that they're sacrificing to them. Not going to happen. It ain't going to happen. And this is Daniel's perspective. And God blessed him. God did a miracle there and began already to prove. Think about what Melzar is thinking. He's like, well, you know what? There's something to this God. I don't know why he let his people get captured, but there's something about this guy. I mean, he's a real God, because look at this. 3 years of eating nothing but vegetables and water, and they are fatter and look more comfortable than all the other kids. You know, what's going on there? Melzar is now getting proof of the truth of the God of Israel. And I think when we start to look at this and draw application, it's just very obvious. Daniel lived in a nation where there was lip service given to worshiping the God of Israel, but in secret, people were really worshiping false gods. And then he found himself, very soon afterwards, living in a different nation, a brand new nation, a whole different place, where they didn't even give lip service to the God of Israel anymore, and they expected him to follow their gods. It was the smart, intelligent, wise thing to do. All the smart people knew that the God of Israel was destroyed, and you know, you're fine to go ahead and, you know, worship him. Just don't act like he's actually real. You start pretending like all that stuff about God is true, then we're going to have a problem. You worship him secretly. That's fine. And don't we kind of live in a scenario like that today? I mean, where we used to live, if anyone here 30 years old and older, or even sometimes a little younger than that, you know that we used to live in a different nation than we live in today. We used to live in a nation that at least gave lip service to God, even though they kind of worshiped their own gods in their hearts. And now today we have a brand new God. We have a whole new nation. We're living in a completely different place. Today, there's a new God. It's not Bel or Nebo. It's self, right? It's the God of my feelings. And whatever I feel is true. And you're fine to go ahead and worship your false Jesus God. I mean, go ahead and fantasize about Jesus. But you're going to have problems with the rest of the world when you start acting like it's true. As long as you go around about your day pretending that all this Jesus nonsense is just that nonsense, you're fine. But don't go preaching it like it's true. Well, here's the thing about God. If what we believe in the Bible is true, and it is, we are the only religion that has ever had evidence for our faith. Like actual, solid, historical, scientific, geographical, all the different kinds of evidences, it's all there. Not to mention that Jesus rose from the dead. But if it's true, then we have a mandate to tell other people, because otherwise they're going to be under the judgment of God for all of eternity. And not only that, but even if we didn't care about the fact that they were going to be under the judgment of God for all of eternity, which we should, but even if we didn't care about that, we have a God who has told us, I have all power in heaven and earth, go into all nations and preach the gospel. So now we have a mandate, whether we care about these people or not, which we should, but whether we care about them or not, we've got to preach the gospel and show people the commands of Christ and call them to submission to Christ. We have to do that. But here's the thing, and I see this almost on a daily basis. Almost on a daily basis. I'm getting comments, I put a lot of stuff online and on YouTube and stuff. And there's people who say, well, that's great that you believe that, but people don't believe that. There's a lot of people who disagree with you. And then I'll see something like this: stop preaching your religion. You ever hear that? Stop preaching your religion. I stop and scratch my head. Hang on a second. First of all, stop expecting me to act like my religion is false. If it's true, I have to preach it. If it's false, why in the world would it be my religion? Right? I believe it because it's true, and because it is true, I must preach it. That's what we do. And so we live in a society today that says, yeah, that's fine, but now you're offending our God, which is our feelings. And we have a God. It's our feelings, And you can't mess with that God. So as long as your God doesn't mess with our God, you are fine. You talk about Jesus saying, be kind to one another. That's fine. Go ahead and talk about that. But you talk about Jesus saying, repent, or else you will likewise perish. I don't want to hear that. That's offensive to me. You're not allowed to preach that. You're only allowed to preach the things that we give you the right to preach, because otherwise you're going against our God, which is ourselves. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, we have the same problem that Daniel has, but we have the same God that Daniel has too. Daniel had a problem. It was nobody wanted him to, and the entire structure of the society thought he was crazy and was offended by what he was doing. They thought they were being kind to him, and he was snubbing his nose at them. But yet God could not work through all of the other children. He could only work through 4 of them. Because it was only 4 who said, I will not pretend like God isn't real. I will not do that. You can call me what you want to call me. You can teach me what you want to teach me. But I won't act in ways that dishonor God as if what we believe isn't true. Because it is true. And in fact, the proof that it was true was the fact that they were in Babylon. Because their whole nation had been taken captive as God had promised all the way back in Deuteronomy 32. So here we have the problem. Here we have the solution. And we must understand that if God is going to do any work in our world today, it's not because we're playing nice with people. I'm not saying we should be rude. I'm just saying it's not about, we're not going to structure our whole Christianity about being around being nice to someone and making them feel good. Our Christianity is based on Christ and His Word and the truth about God. And we have a God who is with us in it all. We don't back down. We don't try to be rude. Daniel wasn't trying to be rude. He's like, listen, I can't do it. I cannot do it. I firmly believe that your gods are false and mine is correct. I cannot do that. I cannot eat that food. You can do whatever else you want. Give me the vegetables, I'll do that. But I won't eat the meat. And this should be our attitude too, because if God is going to do a work in our nation like He did in Babylon, which He certainly can do, it's not going to be through people who say, I'm just going to make everybody feel good with the way that I act, and I'm going to shut up when they want me to shut up. No, it's going to be people who say, no, this is true, and I will not defile myself by pretending that it's not. Father in heaven, I thank you for the amazing example of these 4 teenage boys that decided that they were going to do what was right and honor you no matter how much pressure came on them from the rest of the world. Lord, I pray that you'd give us that spirit. We are living in a world where it is increasingly unpopular to believe that God even exists, let alone that He wants us to repent and live for Him. But yet there's nothing more important that anyone ever needs to know than the fact that God exists and He wants us to repent and believe in Him. And so I pray, Lord, that you would help us. That you would give us your spirit, give us your strength to stand and to obey and to follow Jesus, though the world forsakes us, though we're hated, though we're mocked, and though we're laughed at, though there may be angry mobs that rise against us, we will stand on the solid rock. We will stand on the truth, not only out of compassion for those who will hate us for it, but because you told us to do it. And we submit ourselves to you. I pray that this would be our heart, that we would be like Daniel and Azariah and Mishael and Hananiah. And put this in our hearts. Drive it deep down into our hearts, we pray, in Jesus' name.